At 30,000 feet above the Earth, the plane stopped making noise in the most terrifying way possible, not with a bang or a scream or the ripping of metal, but with a sudden, unnatural silence that felt heavier than sound itself, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and tells your body something is very wrong even before your mind can catch up. The engines, which had been a steady, comforting roar just seconds before, faded into a thin whine and then nothing, and in that frozen moment passengers looked up from their screens, from their coffee cups, from half-finished conversations, all sharing the same confused glance, the same unspoken question. An international flight, smooth skies, routine day, and then silence. The seatbelt sign blinked on again, the cabin lights flickered once, and the aircraft shuddered as if it had lost its balance in the air. Somewhere near the back of the plane, a baby began to cry, sharp and panicked, as though it sensed what the adults had not yet allowed themselves to admit. The captain's voice did not come on. Neither did the calm reassurance of the co-pilot. Seconds passed, stretching longer than they should, and fear began to creep in, quiet but fast, the way it always does when there is no explanation. In seat 18A sat 11-year-old Lily Carter, her feet not quite reaching the floor, a paperback novel open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in several minutes. She was flying alone for the first time, sent ahead to stay with her aunt for the summer, her parents promising it would be an adventure, promising everything would be fine. Lily had always liked airplanes. Not in a childish way, not because they were big and shiny, but because they made sense to her. She liked systems, liked knowing how things worked, liked the idea that something so heavy could stay in the sky if enough rules were followed. Her father used to joke that she asked more questions than a flight engineer. As the plane dipped slightly, her stomach rose, but instead of screaming or crying, Lily looked up, eyes narrowing, listening. She felt it immediately, this wasn't turbulence. This was something else. The flight attendants moved quickly now, their smiles gone, voices low but urgent as they checked overhead bins and whispered into intercoms that weren't answering back. A woman across the aisle clutched her husband's arm. Someone said, "Is this normal?" and no one answered. The plane lurched again, more sharply this time, trays rattling, a few screams breaking loose like cracks in glass. Lily's heart hammered, but her mind was strangely clear, like the moment before a test when everything you studied suddenly lines up. She remembered her dad's old flight simulator in the garage, the one he'd let her use when she was younger, the one that taught you what happened when engines failed, when altitude dropped too fast, when you had seconds to react. She remembered him saying, "Planes don't just fall out of the sky. There's always something you can do." The oxygen masks did not drop, which somehow made things worse, because it meant the plane wasn't in a dramatic freefall, just a slow, terrifying glide into the unknown. Finally, the intercom crackled, not with the captain's voice, but with the strained, shaking tone of a flight attendant trying desperately to sound calm. There had been an issue in the cockpit, she said. Both pilots were unresponsive. They were asking if there was anyone on board with flight experience. The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible, and for a moment there was nothing but the hum of fear, until a man stood halfway down the aisle and said he flew small planes, once, years ago, though his voice cracked even as he spoke. Another woman claimed she worked in aviation, but not as a pilot. No one moved toward the cockpit. The flight attendant repeated the request, louder now, panic slipping through the cracks. Lily felt something twist inside her chest, not bravery exactly, but responsibility, the uncomfortable awareness that knowing something and not using it can be worse than knowing nothing at all. She looked down at her hands, small, trembling, then back up at the closed cockpit door. She thought of her parents watching the flight tracker at home, trusting the blinking dot moving steadily across the map. She thought of the hundreds of people around her, strangers whose lives were balanced on invisible equations of speed and altitude. And before she could talk herself out of it, before fear could fully grab hold, Lily raised her hand. At first, the flight attendant didn't even see her. Adults were speaking, arguing, voices overlapping. Lily stood up in her seat, heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it, and said, "I can help." Heads turned. A few people laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, thinking this was a child trying to be brave. The flight attendant rushed over, crouching down, her expression soft but desperate. "Sweetheart, this is serious," she said. Lily nodded. "I know," she replied, her voice shaking but firm. "I've used flight simulators. I know basic controls. I know what to do if engines fail." The attendant hesitated, torn between protocol and reality, between the rules and the clock that was ticking faster with every foot of altitude lost. Another jolt rocked the plane, harder this time, and someone screamed Lily's name even though they didn't know it, a sound of pure fear aimed at anyone who might listen. The flight attendant swallowed, then nodded once. "Come with me," she said. As Lily walked down the aisle, legs trembling, people stared at her with a mix of disbelief and desperate hope, the kind of hope that doesn't ask questions because it can't afford to. The cockpit door opened, revealing a sight Lily had only seen in simulations: flashing warning lights, screens filled with data, and two pilots slumped in their seats, oxygen masks dangling uselessly. The smell of something burnt hung in the air. Lily's breath caught, fear finally crashing over her like a wave, but she pushed it down, remembering every lesson, every virtual crash she'd learned from. She climbed into the pilot's seat, barely tall enough, the controls massive beneath her hands, and for the first time since the engines went silent, the plane felt like it was waiting, as if the sky itself had paused to see what she would do next. Somewhere behind her, hundreds of lives held their breath. And just before Lily reached for the controls, before she spoke into the radio for the first time, the screen faded on that moment of impossible stillness, because what happens next changes everything.